Good afternoon to everybody connected from here and from there. In Los Angeles is 11 a.m. right now. Yes.
Yes.
So this third session of Gender Sounds organized by ESMUC. Thank you to all the collaborators that made this program possible. Today's session is about opera, the first music genre to put women in the public eye. And for that matter, we have invited an expert in gender politics in classical music and opera, Dr. Kristi Brown-Montesano. She's the chair of music history at the Colburn Conservatory of Music in Los Angeles, an amazing place for research also in the areas of music and film and television. So Dr. Brown-Montesano, she received her PhD in musicology from Berkeley, with a specialization of 18th century Western European music. And she's a passionate public musicologist and a trained vocalist. And also she's the author of the book Understanding the Women of Mozart Operas, and offers a detailed study of the female characters in The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, Così fan tutte, and The Magic Flute. On today's presentation, she has chosen one of the top 3 operas staged around the world, Carmen, by French composer Georges Bizet, and that also epitomizes a common thread in the canonic repertoire, framing violence against women in terms that reinforce patriarchal values and expectations. On rescuing Carmen from Carmen, which is the title of this session, Dr. Brown-Montesano will consider the question whether Carmen, the character, can be saved from the demands of Carmen, the opera. So welcome, Dr. Brown-Montesano, and I remind you, if you have questions, I can translate them afterwards, and we have questions and answers after your talk. Adelante.
So good evening to you all, and the first thing I would like to say is thank you for being so skilled that I'm able to present in my native language, because if I presented in Spanish, I think that you would be quite challenged to follow me. So Italian, I'm pretty good, but I'm still working on Spanish. So I appreciate the flexibility here in terms of language. I'm going to share a screen now. I'm hoping that what I provide for you here will help you also follow along with my points more clearly. So here is our first slide. My own difficulties with Carmen, the opera, difficulties I encountered as an educator, a scholar, and a woman, began decades before these video recordings from which I took the images were made. As a grad student at UC Berkeley in the late 80s and early 90s, I was among the first generation of students galvanized by the new musicology, not least the work of musicologist Susan McClary, whose vanguard publication, Feminine Endings, came out just as I was formulating my own dissertation on Mozart's women characters. One of the essays in this book was titled Sexual Politics in Classical Music, and it deals specifically with Carmen. And while McClary makes many striking observations about the opera, her reading of how Bizet's musical choices actually shape listener reception of the finale of the opera left a powerful and lasting impression on me. And here is an excerpt. As Jose pleads with Carmen to give in, the harmonic bass line turns into a maddeningly slippery chromatic floor. Not only Jose, but also the listener, who is, knowingly or not, trained in terms of classical tonal discourse through exposure to film scores and television, longs for this flood of chromaticism to be stopped, for stability to be reestablished, even though we know that the triumph of tonal closure means the violent murder of Carmen. Bizet's musical strategies, in other words, set up almost unbearable tensions that cause the listener not only to accept Carmen's death as inevitable, but actually to desire it. At the same moment that the crowd inside the bull ring cheers in response to Escamillo's victory over the bull, we outside the ring witness and celebrate victory over an even more treacherous form of beast. Chromatic slippage, carefully defined through the opera as the feminine, is purged once and for all from the discourse as though but natural necessity. The major triad prevails. Now I have a clip with English subtitles available, and this is Jonas Kaufmann and Anna Caterina Antonacci in the leading roles, and just a clip from the finale. So I'm sure many of you already know it, if not all, but to keep it fresh in our minds.
Carmen, ne me quitte pas. Carmen, ne
Now I want to point out that part right there, because in Carmen's kind of credo statement, we do in fact have a very strong major chord. So it's something that McClary didn't actually point out, but there is this kind of sense of closure that she introduces. This is my truth. Let's continue. That's the slippery chromatic bass line that we're hearing.
Je l'aime et devant l'amour même, je répéterai que je l'aime. Tu tenais infâme entre ses bras, rire de moi. Ça finira pas, c'est moi que tu iras. Non, non, jamais. Rien de te menacer. Frappez-moi donc. Ou laissez-moi passer. Pour la dernière fois, t'aimes. Veux-tu me suivre? Non, non. Cette bague autrefois, tu me l'avais donnée. Dieu! Eh bien, tenez!
at the end you had da 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 da, right? You're definitely getting her kind of augmented second otherness in there, and then da 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 bum bum bum. We get the big finish. It resolves to this moment. McClary's conclusion that Bizet's score primes us to a need, a desire for Carmen's death came back to me in 2011 when I was looking into how opera companies marketed their main stage productions to families and school-age children. And I came across this, a new production at the San Francisco Opera explicitly titled Carmen for Families. It was an abridged 2-hour version of the opera, which was sung in English. The recommended age was, when I spoke to the San Francisco Opera's director of education, was decided that it would be 10 years old, and that the reason for that was more about the overt sexuality of the opera. When I inquired specifically about how they were going to handle Carmen's murder for this family staging, the director confirmed that Carmen was still stabbed to death on stage in the finale. They thought it was a successful enough venture that they ended up creating instead a movie version that was cut down even further to 1 hour. And I've actually viewed the film and can confirm that Carmen's homicide took place on cue in front of a somewhat fidgety audience of children, many of them younger than 10. And I want to be clear, I am not interested in policing who goes to an opera when. If a parent thinks a child is ready for Carmen, so be it. But what struck me was the idea of marketing this explicit, marketing it as a family production, adding an age limit, cutting it down, worrying about sexuality and the use of tobacco, translating into English, but that the final act, a man stabbing his ex-girlfriend to death, could not or should not be altered or omitted. It has to happen for the work to work. And in fact, McClary's words came back to me again with horrifying power when I viewed a YouTube video posted by the San Francisco Opera itself around the same time, in which a representative from the opera interviewed children about what they thought about the Carmen performance they had just watched. And this first group is, I can tell by what they say, they are 5th graders, which means that they are right at that 10-year mark.
What was your favorite part about Carmen?
When Jose stabbed Carmen.
When Don Jose stabbed Carmen, what was your favorite part?
Same as him.
When Don Jose stabbed Carmen, what was your favorite part about Carmen?
The end when he killed her.
The end when he killed her?
Yeah, Carmen was annoying, so I didn't like her very much. Truthfully, it was. And the music was great too.
So this was from a high school night for students to go to the opera. And I was shocked, not only because they were so forthright, like that was the part they liked. And that was about half the students who said this. They only interviewed about 7. Others were much more generic. I enjoyed it all. I loved the acting. One woman talked about how she admired Carmen, but couldn't relate to her because she, the young woman, was more soft, was more gooey in English about love. But those were the two, these 3 were very strong about this. And this came back to me again when I was speaking to a fellow opera lover who was actually interviewing me, and she mentioned that her grandsons, she took her grandsons to a performance of Carmen, so they are very young as well. And she said, of course, they wanted to see the part where she was killed, but I hope they would also enjoy the music as well. So obviously, these are just a few examples. It's hardly a scientific data set, and they involve children who, it could be argued, don't yet have fully developed understanding of the ethical difficulty, the thorniness of the opera's message. But it stuck with me, this idea of, are we expecting to see Carmen die? And is it a necessity of the opera for it to actually function dramatically? This came back to me yet again more recently with the 2018 Maggio Musicale Fiorentino, staging of Carmen, because the director, Leo Muscato, following a proposal by Maggio Musicale Fiorentino theater director Cristiano Chiarot, changed the ending so that Carmen, and this is a still from this, in self-defense draws a pistol and kills Don Jose. There was a huge, huge outcry from a good portion of the audience with boos, whistles. There were also a strong critical reaction. But Leo Muscato, the director, the stage director, said this, and this is something I just want to kind of have in our heads. The death of Carmen is the engine that drives the opera. So why reverse the situation? But then I understood that what Chiarot, the general director, was calling for was reasonable. The theme of death in the opera has a strong masculine element. The woman must sacrifice herself in order to save her freedom. It is a point of view that today makes no sense. So I wanted, with this in mind, to address 3 prominent and related themes that I found in the negative reviews from the critical press, from the professional press, arguments for why Carmen must die. The first of these would be what I'm calling the Werktreue idea, that the integrity of the original work as defined by the composer should not be challenged or changed. The original artwork must be preserved. Now, aside from the, oh, and here's an example from the press, just so you can see it. What's next? Should we change Romeo and Juliet to address suicide or Othello to combat racism? Now, besides the fact that the Werktreue, this emphasis on the score and the original work as a holy text, didn't really exist until the latter 19th century. The fact that a canonic repertoire where you would keep bringing old works back also relates to a little about a century and a half ago when this began to happen. Before that, there was no idea of Werktreue with an opera. And Mozart was not playing Domenico Scarlatti in his concerts. His Viennese theater was not bringing back, Handel operas. This wasn't happening. I can also think of it with dramatic things besides the fact that opera itself, well, let's go to this. Swan Lake, you've seen Swan Lake, it has at least 3 possible endings. Films regularly remake novels in completely different ways. So the Werktreue idea has problems in a general sense. But I will also say that this position, which ironically has been emphasized basically by audio-only recordings of opera, which is completely against a composer's original intentions. No opera composer expected you just to listen to the music. But these are some ideas that I have about why the Werktreue idea goes against the very nature of opera as a staged genre. So look at 3 components. 1, as I say, through early 19th century, even the musical content of an opera could be altered, and frequently was. According to the singer, regular ornamentation was added, arias were cut, arias were added. The Romantics took Don Giovanni and they cut out the entire last section of it, the ending, because they felt the happy ending chorus went against the romantic spirit of the drama. But let's say, so that's a latter day, but the music tends to be the most sacred of the aspects. The libretto is often mediated through subtitles. I'm sure that you've probably seen subtitles that don't actually capture the spirit of the original work. The subtitles sometimes get rid of offensive language or do things in more politically sensitive ways. But most important of all, and what I say is the lifeblood of opera as a living art form, is the staging. Stagings are routinely new. In fact, one way you get excitement for an audience to come to their, their umpteenth, the 30th Carmen that they witnessed, is to say, oh, but there's a new production, there's a new staging. And this is where the dialogue and critique with the original artwork can take place. So if you want to say something that maybe considers the artwork from a new perspective, or to add something to the reception that is more in line with a 21st century thinking, the staging is where it's going to happen. I would even argue in some sense that the very existence of an increasingly aging canonic repertoire goes against the original spirit of the genre of opera, which was for a very long time much closer to what we might think of with music theater or film. Especially with music theater, of course, there are older works that are kept in the repertoire, especially with revivals, recordings, streaming. But the live theater repertoire needs to be new. Everybody is looking for the new musical to appear on Broadway or on the West End. And the case of film, even more skewed toward the new. So opera's situation is a little odd, and this conservative position of Werktreue, I think, does the genre no help in terms of keeping it alive and relevant. The second position, I would say, is that was then, this is now. So contemporary values that don't align with the original context are irrelevant, even counterproductive or antithetical to the artistic meaning of the original work. And it is legitimate to do everything on the stage, but the politically correct does not have retroactive value. This is another argument against changing the original work. So it's also related to Werktreue, but here again, I'm going to counter it, and I'm throwing these points and counterpoints to you as a way, I hope, also to have some discussion afterward. So my counter to this would be that this is a double evasive defense, in a sense, that we hear often with opera, which is that there's a claim that it is timeless, that is still as relevant today as it was then. It's a timeless work. And then when you say, but there's this, and this is problematic, there's racism, there's misogyny, there are patriarchal values or xenophobic values that we don't want to embrace, then everybody switches and said, well, it's a work of a time. You can't blame it. That was then. The second thing that strikes me is this idea that politically correct, which has a very demeaning, I mean, there's a lot of politics around that term now, is seen as though it's just censorship. It's a revision of history. It's just a kind of behaving well, as opposed to the fact that something might be addressing an ethical concern that has very real life stakes today, that someone might actually be, that there is a rape culture, that domestic violence is real, that racism and bigotry are real. So it becomes like you're just changing it to make it more as though it goes down a little easier. You're not allowing the spirit to come through, as opposed to, is there something wrong with the spirit? And this is what I say. The reality is that patriarchal power structures and violent misogynist behavior existed then and exist now. The past is the present. So Carmen gives us a drama that is incredibly relevant, but not for the reasons that many of these critics might say. The third and last point that I would make, and this was the most surprising for me, is the idea that the unaltered opera allows for and already communicates a pro-woman meaning. And I hear this often. Operatic female identified characters reflect positive values, even if, and perhaps because, they are murdered or commit suicide. So there is no need to reconsider the ending. So that there's this idea that canonic opera heroines die in order to demonstrate female superiority in terms of accepted ethical values. I will quote at length, this is a woman, a journalist, And she has this to say about the Maggio Musicale Fiorentino staging. Women in the work, sorry, I should have translated. Women in opera are strong even when they are victims. They retain a great dignity, unknown to some male characters who, in the name of their machismo, demonstrate instead all their weakness and subjection towards those women who say they love, and who choose to kill, failing to understand love's nature, its strength. And she adds this: how many women accept the last encounter, the clarifying one, despite knowing full well that the end is always the same as itself? Yet they continue to do so, heroines and victims, prisoners of a millennial tradition that repeats itself and for which they obviously fail to draw the necessary teaching. Carmen will never give in, free she was born and free she will die. With these heartfelt words, Carmen claims her role, her freedom, knowing full well that she signs her death sentence. Listen, Carmen doesn't need modern champions. She was avenged by Mérimée, by Bizet, who portrayed a man as co-store, or rather as homunculus, Don José, who cannot inspire any sympathy by leaving the scene to the beautiful gypsy. I was very surprised at this in one ways, but in another way, not at all. I was surprised. Let's start with, this is her main argument, that Mérimée and Bizet, and this would be the librettist Alevi, they've already saved Carmen. So Mérimée avenged her, Bizet made her the star of the show. And Carmen saved herself by dying for her principles, for being a martyr against toxic masculine power. I'd like to start with her assertion that Carmen has already been saved by the original creators in the story and the opera adaptation. I just reread the original Mérimée story again, and I can tell you, I don't know what Bardoni is talking about. Told by a narrator, Mérimée's original tale draws clear moral lines along race, both race and gender, between a humanized Don José that the narrator really likes, a soldier turned brigand who is described as blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and noble-looking, and the narrator likens Don José to Milton's Satan, who is definitely an anti-hero. And this is against the copper-skinned Carmen, who is described as a beautiful but treacherous criminal, a sorceress, and she is made analogous to a long list of animals, a cat, a wolf, a filly, and that's a young female horse in the middle of a stud farm, so in the middle of stallions, a chameleon, a baby goat, a monkey. But it was Bizet and Alevi that decided to connect Carmen dramatically with the bull killed by the toreador. That is, a dangerous animal killed by a warrior hero to the applause of spectators. In the Mérimée tale, the bull lives. In fact, the bull takes down the toreador. It's a minor incident. And José kills Carmen much later out in the wilderness with no witnesses. So it was Bizet who added the contrasting female character of Micaela. There is no Micaela in the original story. So Bizet and Alevi exploit the misogynistic angel whore opposition that patriarchal power structures find so useful in controlling women's behavior. Micaela is the pinnacle of modesty, devotion, and honorable woman's direct link with José's mother. Bizet also cuts down on the many times that Carmen tells José, many times in the original story, that being with her means trouble, that he's not made to live her life, that he's an idiot for being jealous, for imagining that she will be a good little monogamous wife, because her freedom is the only thing to which she will commit. And in both story and opera, Carmen is repeatedly aligned with devils or demons. Both Mérimée and Bizet consistently give voice to Don José's victimhood, his Christianity. In the story, he asks for a mass for the woman he's going to kill. His helplessness against the dark central powers of this gypsy witch. And this is from the story. I said to Carmen, be rational, I implore you, listen to me, all the past is forgotten. Yet you know it is you who have been my ruin. It is because of you that I am a robber and a murderer. Carmen, my Carmen, let me save you and save myself with you. And when she throws the ring back to him, he said, I was wild with fury. I drew my knife. I would have had her look frightened. I wanted her to look frightened and beg for mercy, but that woman was a demon. I think it is very difficult to deny the power of Don José's perspective on audiences and their sympathy for him and their blame on Carmen, especially if you look at the opera's reception history, right up to the kids attending the San Francisco production. I do think, as I've noted before, that the finale of the opera highlights Carmen's free I have lived, free I will die, with a heroic musical moment. But McClary still has a point. The agitated harmonic tension of the finale screams for resolution, which in its original form, the opera offers with Carmen's murder. Carmen saw it as fate. Don José saw it as retribution. I see both as part of the same framework, one which Baldoni herself describes when she wrote, how many women accept the last encounter, the clarifying one, despite knowing full well that the end is always the same as itself. And I ask myself, why is this ending the inevitable ending? And here I fault the canonic repertoire of opera itself, which basks in what Catherine Clément so elegantly described as the undoing of women. And I'm going to show you 3 quick slides that are color-coded so you can kind of see. So here are the top 10 produced operas on the same year as the Maggio Musicale Fiorentino stage. All of those in purple have a female character who dies. 2 of those, Figaro and Barbiere, are comic operas. If you look, so that's, we have 7 out of 10. Those which have male character dies, I'm including Monostatos as his descent with the queen. I would like to point out he is a Black male. He is an other male, not our hero. Only in Tosca of these do we really have somebody who suffers in the way a woman often suffers in opera. And then of these 10 operas, here are the ones in which a woman is either abandoned, killed, sexually harassed, humiliated, and or punished. Every single one, except for Evgeny Onegin. And that one is probably the most corrective, not surprised. I mean, written by Tchaikovsky, a very different perspective. So Baldoni, this critic, like many opera lovers, wants to see power in women's victimhood, their alleged bravery in front of that last encounter, whether she wields the knife herself like Madama Butterfly, who Baldoni also celebrates, or stares down her murderer like Carmen. But what I believe is missing here is any consideration about how these victims both attest to and reinforce the misogynist structures that are as prevalent today as in Bizet's time. And let's see, I want to make sure we're okay with, yeah, I have a few minutes. So here's, Clément puts it very well in her opera and the Undoing of Women. Opera is not forbidden to women, that is true. Women are its jewels, you say, the ornament indispensable for every festival. No prima donna, no opera. But the role of jewel, a decorative object, is not the deciding role. And on the opera stage, women perpetually sing their eternal undoing. The emotion is never more poignant than at the moment when the voice is lifted to die. I am not forgetting that it is a prima donna who sings and that she is playing a role, but I am too well acquainted with the power of spectacle not to watch fiercely with all my eyes and listen with all my ears to the stories repeated 1,000 times by men who pursue women and reduce them to nothing. More recently, I read, frankly, in the years after the election of Donald Trump as president here, Kate Mann's brilliant study called Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny, which came out in 2017. Kate Mann is an analytical philosopher, And she was trying to walk down exactly how misogyny works, its relationship and difference from sexism. And I took this small excerpt, which she talks about her own process and why she wanted to look at misogyny and was disappointed that more people were interested in things like trigger warnings than the nature of misogyny. And she says this: the fact that misogyny is killing girls and women, literally and metaphorically, clearly isn't enough to grip that many people. I shouldn't have been surprised by this. It has always been killing girls and women, literally and metaphorically, especially those who step out of line. So it goes. It is a bitter, sad state of affairs, but it is hard to see what would change it. And this is her brilliant point. Misogyny is a self-masking problem. Trying to draw attention to it is illicit by the lights of the phenomenon itself, since women are supposed to minister to others rather than solicit moral attention and concern on their own behalf. The reaction to the Maggio Musicale Carmen seems to me to be at least partially connected to Mann's premise here, and Kate Mann's premise, that to talk about misogyny inspires a misogynistic reaction, since the phenomenon itself imposes a value of self-abnegation on women. And I will close with a couple of thoughts. The first is the words of Cristiano Chiarot, who was the director of the festival, of the Maggio Musicale Festival that year. And he asked simply, at a time when our society is having to confront the murder of women, how can we dare to applaud the killing of a woman? So this seemed very strong. And then I'm going to offer a private and personal anecdote, which also drives, so that nobody thinks that this is pure philosophy on my part, pure academic exercise on my part. My son, who I had the joy of watching get married yesterday, or rather Saturday, who's now 27, when he was about 11, I was teaching Carmen for my classes at the Colburn Conservatory. And he came in and it was close to the end. So I paused the video and I said, listen, this is a very strong ending. It could be disturbing. So sit down, but then let's talk about it. If you want to watch it, you can watch it, but let's talk afterward. After the ending happens and he, sees the shockingly violent murder on stage, he turned to me and we had a discussion about this, I said, no woman, no matter how much she's hurt a man's feelings, no matter how disappointed a man might be that she's broken up with him, it never is okay. It never justifies that he should harm her, that he should murder her. And that's a real problem with this opera. So we took it in, we talked about it. Well, I want to say that a year later, we met this young woman, Mary Kay DeSaro. She babysat my children and the neighbors' children. They were the ones who introduced us a few times. At age 23, after just a couple times babysitting, she was stabbed to death in my very nice residential neighborhood by a former boyfriend. She broke up with him because he had cheated on her. And when she refused to get back together with him, he came to her house, took a knife from the kitchen, and, as I said, repeatedly stabbed her. He was clearly a disturbed person himself, since he ended his own life in a dramatically operatic way by setting himself on fire in a car. When I had to tell my children this, my son turned to me, my 12-year-old son, and said, "It's like Carmen." So I believe that we have to consider whether fate needs to drive this or whether there is a choice for Carmen to live. I believe that changing the finale still offers a dramatically logical resolution of the tension, because Carmen's major mode, cri de coeur, about freedom, could link to the major ending. The only thing standing in the way of this ending is the idea of fate. Carmen's acceptance, like butterflies, that there's nothing else she can do, that this is how it has to end. But if she says no, if she answers her ex-lover's deadly ultimatum with an act of self-defense, what do we lose? We are left instead with an instrumental ghost of Don José's remorse. So don't we gain back something at least as valuable as what we allegedly lose? At the very least, I believe Carmen deserves the choice. And I'll close with the words of Adrienne Rich in When We Dead Awaken, writing as revision. Revision, the act of looking back, of seeing with fresh eyes, of entering an old text from a new critical direction, is for women more than a chapter in cultural history. It is an act of survival. Until we can understand the assumptions in which we are drenched, we cannot know ourselves. And this drive to self-knowledge for women is more than a search for identity. It is part of her refusal of the self-destructiveness of male-dominated society. Thank you.
Beautiful. Bravo. Very well. Thank you very much, Kristi. Is there any questions in the audience right now? Because I would like to pose, after this exam, we can see that violence is in the opera, and is there any hopes for a better future and make more real issues part of the plays? Like we talk, like in the San Diego, there's this piece about immigration or LGTB. Just a few months ago, I learned that the Metropolitan Opera, one of the largest theaters in the world, in the United States, sorry, in 138 years of existence, has staged some 300 titles, none by a Black composer, okay? And just recently, when they opened after COVID times, they presented for the first time the opera of a Black musician. So, you know, I mentioned that because there is this harmful influence, you know, we're talking about the system of productions around the opera, these marketing materials, educational materials that need to be addressed, right?
Very much so. In fact, the Met, when they put this on, there was also a Black female co-director, stage director. So that was also a big event that happened. And the librettist. So there was quite, this is a big thing. Los Angeles is putting Otello, Verdi on this coming season. And it's the first time I have ever seen a Black singer, tenor, take the title role. So I'm sure there will be people who think that this is a politically correct move as opposed to a logical staging. I mean, unlike others where you can have, let's say, race-blind casting, I mean, nobody really cares if you have a Black Figaro and a Korean, so I say Black American, we could say African, but Black American Figaro with a Korean-born Susanna and a Mexican or Colombian count, or nobody cares, because that opera turns on class, but not so much on, it doesn't, that the racial component is not there. And to me, you always have to look at where is the difficulty in this? What is the friction in this opera? And then the cast, since race is so central to Otello, I don't understand how you can ignore it. And so we are facing this, yes, very much. I see there's questions and, oh, yes, Patricia, thank you. So what Kate Mann, and I know it's a tricky thing. The idea is that misogyny, and she sees this as a system which in general wants to urge women to accept how things are, that everything's fine. If you draw attention and say, but wait, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be your girlfriend. I don't, that, or if you begin to say women are suffering or you're treating women unfairly, the reaction from misogyny, which does not want to reveal itself, misogyny's ultimate aim is to convince everybody there is no misogyny. Does that make sense? that the system itself, its aim is to hide itself so that everybody just says, oh no, everything's great, right? And I'm going to be, and I remember that, I've experienced it myself. So the moment you begin to, as a woman, say, wait, I have my hand up and I don't accept this, you've probably seen how men will react to you, not as a person bringing a reasonable concern forward, but you begin to be categorized as a problem within an otherwise just fine system. So I remember, let me give an example, which isn't about misogyny, but about power structures, but of which misogyny is part. I was in a search committee. There was a person who was the boss of my boss on this search committee. Really, he shouldn't have been there, but he wants to take control of everything. He was pushing for his own candidates very strongly. Now, he's the boss of my boss. He's my double boss. He's my capo above that, right? And I said, I am very uncomfortable with the power that you have all over us because I feel your desire for us to accept your candidates. And I don't feel comfortable disagreeing with you. Which I admit is that, I said it. Even though my female identified dean agreed that this gentleman had done that, she came to me and said, you brought unnecessary tension to the room by asking that question. I was supposed to ask it privately. I was supposed to be more gentle in how I said it. I've seen the negative things from my book are often that I'm hysterical. And I think you can see from my presentation today, I am not hysterical. I am not shrieking. I am not saying kill all the men. I am simply I want to point out a problem that I experience as a woman, as a teacher, as a mother, that I can't accept Carmen's death as the only answer without great pain and difficulty. So I think that's what happens. How do you break it? Well, this is why the quote from Kate Mann is frankly a little, I wish I had a good demoralized, I would say is the word for us. I don't know, Angelos, if she does not feel optimistic right now. That, and she's writing as an Australian who watched one of the female candidates being taken. Yeah, and I, of course, can say that in the United States, it's very difficult. There's a great deal of pushback against women, especially in politics. And as you know, our former president blatantly said things and had no regret, called women names, saying they were bleeding out of their, whatevers. And so I don't know. I think the only answer I can give is you have to fight the fight where you are. So you have to resist only in the place that you are, obviously with your votes or your whatever. But in my own world, this is my little act of resistance, is to sit down and try to figure out what I'm saying about Carmen and now teach it this way. I'm teaching an intro to opera at UCLA this spring, and we will do Carmen, and I will let them decide, but I will probably present this material, and there will be many different types of people in that classroom. And I'm hoping, and they're young and they're open to certain things. So maybe the next generation, certainly my son does not think of Carmen in these ways, right? In these other ways that people protected. Yes, I believe there's absolutely a racial component to the original. That's without doubt. I don't even have to say I believe. I know that there's a racial component. It's obvious in the narrative. Mérimée goes on to write an entire last subject about the problem with gypsies. Basically, he's an archaeologist, he's an anthropologist, archaeologist, scientist. So this is French exoticism of the 19th century at its best, right? It's really how far ahead we are, but let's look at these primitive people. When Don José kills Carmen in the story, he says, poor child, if she only hadn't been raised by those people. So it actually assigns direct blame for her person and for the way she acts to the gypsies. And then, it plays against resignifying the opera. That's very, and that's exactly true. Yes, thank you. That's, I think that today, you would think that in the United States, to me, that's the very reason to flip it, right? Because we have, and I'm not, obviously I'm not somebody who can speak about Spain and the various aspects there, but my guess is you could look at it there. I mean, they are talking about the regions and different ideas about the regions and who they are. In my husband's country, Italy, you could definitely talk about North and South values. You could make it with the new influx of African immigrants of Northern Africa into Italy. With the United States, our racism problem has been here since the very moment that it became a colony, not just a country, but a colony. Our history of slavery and of continued violent prejudice against civil rights for Black Americans, but really many Americans of color. It would seem that now would be a moment, in fact, to present that not just as the issue of a woman, but a woman being denigrated even more for her cultural, ethnic, racial profile as well.
Totally. We have a question from Joanna. Oh, sorry, Mar, you want to go ahead? Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you, Kristi. It was really interesting. I've been thinking a lot about Carmen these last years and about the Maggio Fiorentino option and everything. And what you said about the way we speak about Carmen and about Ciocio-san and about Tosca and about everyone, I actually always have the feeling that we forget that they are characters, and the fact that they are characters is not neutral. It's not like they have been chosen. Carmen has been chosen by Mérimée, and Bizet's Carmen has been chosen by the librettist. So it's like sometimes I get the feeling that we speak, because when you look, for example, at the top feminist operas or things like this, no, you always find Carmen, Turandot, whatever. And it's like, obviously, we cannot speak about them as feminists, first of all, because it's a term that doesn't apply. That's my opinion, because it's a historical construct doesn't apply, but at the same time, it's not a person, it's a character, no? It's a reflection of the idea of the man of that time, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but then when I heard you speak, which I liked a lot, I thought that there is a very important, to me, there is a very important thing that's what we call universal truths, which I think are so important in opera, because it's like every time I hear someone speaking about opera in like the mainstream way or like the men way, the masculine way, it's like, oh no, but we have to keep bringing Carmen to life because it's such a universal story and it's so important that we see it, no? But at the same time, when you bring together this supposedly universal story to the stage, then everyone seems to, because I've had this conversation with so many people that belong to this world, like directors and musicians and scholars and whatever, and everyone says the same. Everyone says, I am clever enough to differentiate between live and stage, no? Like I am able to see what I see in the stage and know that that is wrong. And what I miss the most is what you said, the contextualization of these operas that are so wrong in our eyes right now in the Me Too era, no? Like the stagings are not, to me, are not okay. The programs are not okay. The marketing strategies are really not okay. Like the way that they are showing it to the world is not okay anymore. But the fact that they belong to this universal sphere, it's like they are untouchable.
Well, that's, oh, sorry, I don't mean, I would
No.
jump in before I forget that when I said the trick of, oh, it's timeless, oh, it's of its time.
Yeah.
Oh, it's timeless, it's time. I would say the same thing. Art changes the world. Oh, art has nothing to do with the world. Art
Yeah.
changes the world. Art has nothing to do with the world. I've had this argument since I was writing my dissertation, and one woman said to me, a female scholar, that, I mean, it went right to my heart. She said, you treat these characters as though they're real people. And I said, no, I treat them as though they're doing real cultural work. If opera is merely entertainment, then we can start getting rid of some of these operas and I'm going to go see more musicals. All right. If you're calling it art and you're saying it has some kind of effect, and then you're going to say, but I know the difference between, first of all, they don't. And Kate Mann would say that is the biggest lie. And I would agree with her, because it reinforces a narrative. And how many women I've talked to about Carmen, including my own mother, who said, well, I just thought she was kind of a tease. I don't know if you understand, but a woman asking for sexual attention, but then walking, a tease and a trollop, a prostitute. As though, and I'm like, but mom, so does that mean she should be killed by her ex-boyfriend? I mean, so the girl who wears a short skirt is asking to be raped. I said, I'm just saying, see how quickly. So real people go to an opera, real people living in a real world. And that opera says, you as a woman do not have a right to say, I'm not committing to anybody, but I like sex, and I'm a businesswoman, and I'm gonna do whatever it takes to make it, because frankly, no one is helping me, right? Mm-hmm. So this idea, do I think Carmen is a good person? Like whatever that means? No, I think she's a poor person. I think she's struggling to get food on the table. I think she's on the margins of society, and she has to she's doing what she has to do to survive. That I absolutely believe. And the truth is that she probably just would have went on with her life, doing her life. She was very, in this tale especially, she's very well respected as a leader. So everybody accepts that she's like the linchpin to the enterprise in their business. They take that away in the opera. They don't really show how she's married in the narrator thing, and she's completely, but she's going to be her own woman. She will suffer no demands from any man. That's literally, and that's a strong position. And maybe it's dangerous, and maybe it would be perfectly fine for her to die in the course of a dangerous life with dangerous people. What bothers me is it's done because this man says, you ruined me, so I am taking you down. And how many ex-husbands, ex-boyfriends use that as their excuse to kill their former girlfriend or wife? You took me down. So if it was just like, well, Carmen lived like she died like she lived, living dangerously, that would be a different opera. That's my problem, is it is telling us something, and that something has a relevance to real life, and it happens. So if you can say, yeah, but that doesn't really happen. No, look at the statistics. So to me, I mean, I hope you'll pardon my language, but in America, we would say that is bullshit, which seems somehow appropriate for mierda de toro. Like that is the idea, like, and it's good, right? We have a bull, like that is a way to hide. And in fact, it's an easy and cowardly way out. And I say without courage to face the facts that with Carmen, we are presented with an artwork that is very problematic in how it's been. And it's almost like, how do you, like the misogyny, how do you pull it back in? It's one of the most famous operas out there, and arguably some of the best tunes, right? That's why you take your kids. I mean, everybody can remember this. Toreador, it's the habanera, it's all. So I think that the Maggio Musicale was brave for taking this on. I wish people would be willing to be surprised. This is something else that Leo Muscato said, is we've lost our ability to be surprised by theater. We just want the same thing over and over and over again. I saw, I always call Patricia, the violinist. She did a Tchaikovsky violin concerto that had me riveted, and I never have to hear that piece again in my life. Like, I am so bored. I teach at a conservatory of orchestral instruments. She did so many new things, but people were, 50% were really upset. The other 50% gave her a standing ovation. And to me, it's like, the fact is that show sold out. And Maggio Musicale put it on again in the fall of the same year. They said, we're going to keep it in the rep for at least 5 years. And I thought, good for you, because there will be an audience wanting to see a new Carmen. And I think there's lots of ways that could be staged. I mean, you could even just alter the whole thing where you, instead of turning like the Met does, where you see the bull dead and stabbed in the ring with Carmen on the side. I mean, you could have them sing in darkness and put up facts. I mean, he could still do it. And this is just me thinking out loud as a director that I'm not, but you could have it go dark and you could put up a screen where you would put up how many people died, how many women were killed by their ex-partners or their partners in any country where it's being given, you know. That would be another way to pop the balloon of Don José's victimhood, right? And remind us of how this works. So I think it's creative laziness that makes people take that position, and to suggest that you're stupid if you ask the question. Because notice they said that I'm smart enough to tell the difference. And I would say I'm smart enough to recognize that there's no difference.
There's one more question, Kristi, from Joanna.
Yes.
She's asking the fact that in the opera of Eugene Onegin, the female character doesn't die. Is that a fact that makes it not as popular, you think?
Well, that's a really interesting thing. You know, the thing about Evgeny is that, and I was reading again the summary just to get every part of it, because I've never been able to see it live. So I played excerpts, but I wanted to get an idea, is that he is actually a representative of a kind of patriarchal societal order. And he gets taken down. Like, he is the main name male who presents himself as, I know better. Don't, you know, this, you're one of these irrational women. You better be more rational. You've got to do more things. And then he finds himself struck by love, and it's too late. Everybody behaves well, and he is left by himself. I think given Tchaikovsky's penchant for melody, it should be more popular, but I think that story does not satisfy the violence. There's also no violence. Well, there is a violence. He kills another man, right? In a duel. So it looks also like he killed his best friend. He's just not a very nice guy. So I would say the character is not that strong, this male character. In general, I find Russian female Tatiana is very strong, but she doesn't give any, she doesn't actually give in to the title character. She says, I'm going to stay with my old husband because I've married him and I'm an honorable person. And so no. So he's thwarted all the way from enacting the demands of kind of patriarchal thought. And I can't say whether the music, but given the popularity of Tchaikovsky, I think that is a really, really good point. I think that that drama does not do the things that people want opera to do. And there needs to be a big death at the end. And I think that's part of it. And most of the time it is a woman's death. So had Tatiana ran after Evgeny Onegin the entire time and then killed herself because he wouldn't love her, and he learns only at the end that he does, that would be the opera version that usually happens.
We should add one more question that it's Patricia's, is on the chat. Can you see it?
Yes, I see it. Oh, do you know if it's true?
Oh, you can, Patricia, you want to hear?
No, Patricia, I do not. Thank you for this. I did not know about this fact. So
sorry, go on.
No, you please go ahead.
No, I heard it. Some musicologists from Vienna told me, and then I actually asked. I asked a gentleman who he was the curator of a very big exhibition that took place in Madrid in La Casa del Lector about Carmen, the figure of Carmen. And this is a man from Sevilla, and there were lots of paintings. I don't know if anybody here saw it. It was amazing. They didn't do the catalog. They have just published it in French now in Belgium. It's funny that Carmen is not published in Spanish, it's published in Belgium. And he confirmed it. He said, this is what people say. And actually, I've never known of any recording, of full recording of the opera by Callas.
I'm going to ask, and then you have to ask what she means by not believing in the character. Is it because she actually thinks Carmen's a bad person and she'd rather play Norma, killing herself off, right? I mean, that is a really good question. And I'm going to investigate that because I'd like it as part of the backstory, the reception of this opera. I mean, Carmen keeps popping back into my life, very much like Don Giovanni. It's an opera that people say, oh, because you talk about it. And every time I loop back, I've grown a little older and I've lived a little more life and I've had more thoughts and there are more things that come forward. And so I'm not done with her yet. I'm not done with the problem. I don't think any of us are. So I appreciate that, Patricia. I would definitely look at that.
The way I heard it is that she didn't like her ending. She didn't believe she was a believable character. And as you know, it changes a lot from the actual literary character to the lady in the opera who is the seductress.
Okay, I'm absolutely going to look into that. That would be really interesting if there's like an interview or something where Callas somehow said this.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you all.
We are going to leave it here. Before we go, I want to congratulate you on your son's marriage. Because
thank you.
You seem very happy.
I'm going to have to learn Spanish now because my daughter-in-law is from Argentina. So I'm going to be adding it between now and when we do the wedding. We'll do a second wedding there. So.
Well, thank you very much for being here, to you and everybody. And we expect to see you next week. We have a session on punk. Let me get it here. It's Lucy O'Brien. She's talking identity, the lead lines of punk feminism. So don't miss that new session. And again, Kristi, thank you for being here.
Thank you. And it's been wonderful. Thank you. A lovely thing. Thank you so much for your questions and your comments. I really appreciate it.